My father spoke with that low, steady voice he used when he wanted to make sure every word landed like a weight. I saw the text you sent to your friend last week, the one where you called this family toxic and said we were the ones holding you back from everything. Your brother forwarded it to me because he thought I needed to know what you really think of us after everything we've been through. We came to this cabin to escape the mess back home, and you're out here making it worse by spreading lies about us to people who aren't even family. You have until the neighborhood gathering tomorrow to fix this, or I'll tell everyone the truth about who you really are and what you've been doing behind our backs. Hi, my name is Olivia Bennett. I'm 27 years old. The words sat between us in the narrow kitchen of the old family cabin like something sharp that no one wanted to pick up. My father stood near the sink, still holding his phone in one hand, the screen dark now, but the damage already done. My brother Ethan leaned against the doorframe behind him, arms crossed, not meeting my eyes. The cabin smelled like old wood and the coffee someone had burned that morning. Outside, the Michigan pines pressed close to the windows, and the lake was just visible through the trees, flat and grey under the late afternoon sky. We had only been here 5 days. It was not a planned trip. My father's small contracting business back in our hometown had run into trouble with a supplier who was threatening legal action, and the gossip had started spreading fast through the tight circle of people who knew our family. My mother suggested the cabin as a place to lie low for a few weeks while things cooled off. I had driven up from the city the same night they called using the last of my paid time off and some of my savings to help cover groceries and the propane bill without making a big deal about it. I thought I was doing what families do when things get hard. Instead, my father and my brother had spent those 5 days quietly rewriting the story of why we were here. I kept my voice even when I finally answered. That text was private. I sent it to Kayla because I needed to talk to someone who wasn't in the middle of all this. I didn't say anything that wasn't true about how heavy it feels right now. My father set the phone down on the counter with a small, deliberate sound. Private doesn't matter when it's about this family. Your brother saw it pop up on your screen when you left your phone on the table yesterday. He did the right thing by showing it to me. Ethan finally looked up, but only for a second. You made it sound like we're the problem, Olivia, like we dragged you here against your will. People are already asking questions about why you're even involved. I figured Dad should know before it got worse. The kitchen felt smaller than it had that morning. I could hear my mother moving around in the living room, folding blankets that didn't need folding, pretending she couldn't hear us. Aunt Diane, who had driven up from 2 towns over when she heard we were here, was out on the porch with her coffee. I wondered how much of this conversation was carrying through the thin walls. I took a slow breath and kept my hands flat on the edge of the counter so they wouldn't shake. I came because you asked me to come. I've been paying for things without saying anything because I knew money was tight. That text was me trying to figure out how to keep helping without losing myself in the process. It wasn't an attack. My father's mouth tightened at the corners. Helping looks different when you're telling outsiders we're toxic. Your job might look impressive on paper, but out here people see things for what they are. You show up with your city clothes and your quiet little deposits into the account and expect us to act like you're saving the day. We're the ones who kept this family together for years while you were off building whatever it is you call a career. The words landed exactly where he wanted them to. I felt the old familiar sting behind my ribs, the one that had been there since I was a teenager, and started doing well in school while Ethan struggled. Back then, it had been small comments at the dinner table. Now it was bigger, and we were all trapped in the same 4 rooms with nowhere else to go. I didn't argue. I nodded once, picked up my jacket from the back of the chair, and walked out the side door onto the narrow path that led toward the lake. The cold air hit my face, and I kept walking until the cabin was out of sight behind the trees. Only then did I let myself stop and press my hands against my eyes for a few seconds. This was supposed to be temporary, a few weeks to let the dust settle back home. Instead, it already felt like the dust was following us here, and my father and my brother were the ones kicking it up. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and opened the thread with Kayla. The last message I had sent her was still there, time-stamped from 2 nights ago, when I had stepped outside after another long, quiet dinner where no one had really talked to me. I don't know how much longer I can do this without saying something I'll regret. They're acting like I'm the one who caused the problems back home just because I have a steady paycheck. I'm trying to help, but it feels like every time I do something, they find a way to make it look like I'm showing off or keeping score. I hate that I even have to think like this about my own family. I hadn't said anything cruel. I hadn't named anyone. I had just been honest with the one person who wasn't living inside this pressure cooker with me. And now that honesty was being used as proof that I was the problem, I deleted the thread anyway. Not because my father had told me to, but because I didn't want it sitting there like evidence against me if my brother decided to check my phone again. The damage was already done. When I walked back to the cabin an hour later, the lights were on in the living room and I could hear voices. Aunt Diane was telling a story about her garden back home, trying to fill the silence the way she always did when things felt heavy. My mother was nodding along her hands, busy with a dish towel. My father and Ethan were at the table with the laptop open between them, looking at something on the screen. No one looked up when I came in. I went straight to the small bedroom I was sharing with my mother and closed the door behind me. The bed was narrow and the quilt smelled like cedar and old lake water. I sat on the edge and stared at the wall for a long time, listening to the low murmur of voices in the other room. I had come here to help hold things together. Instead, I was watching my father and my brother quietly rewrite who I was in the eyes of everyone who mattered to them. And tomorrow there would be a neighborhood gathering at the big cabin down the road, the one the Harlans hosted every fall for the people who kept cabins on this stretch of lake. My father had already made it clear what he planned to do there if I didn't fix things. I didn't know what fixing looked like when the thing that needed fixing was the truth. I lay back on the bed and closed my eyes. The cabin was quiet except for the occasional creak of old wood settling and the distant sound of water against the shore. Somewhere in the main room, my father laughed at something Ethan said the sound, short and sharp. I stayed there in the dark for a long time, not moving, not crying, just breathing through the tight place in my chest and wondering how we had gotten here so fast. The next morning, the cabin felt even smaller than it had the night before. Sunlight came through the thin curtains in weak strips across the floor, and I could hear my mother moving around in the kitchen, trying to stretch what little we had left into something that looked like breakfast. I got up, washed my face in the cold sink, and told myself to stay steady. I had driven up here to help hold things together, not to turn every room into another battlefield. But the words from last night were still sitting in my chest like something I couldn't swallow. When I walked into the main room, my father was already at the table with his coffee, the old newspaper spread open, even though the signal out here was too weak for anything current. Ethan sat beside him, scrolling on his phone with that same closed-off expression he'd worn since we arrived. Aunt Diane, who had driven in from 2 towns over the day before when she heard we were staying at the cabin, was pouring herself a second cup and talking about how early the leaves were turning this year. She smiled at me when I sat down, warm and uncomplicated the way she always had when I was little. My father didn't look up right away. Then he spoke, his voice carrying just far enough for everyone at the table to hear. Olivia's been real quiet this morning, probably still thinking about that text she sent. Funny how someone can smile to your face and then write things like that when they think no one's looking. Aunt Diane paused with her mug halfway to her mouth. She glanced at me, then at my father. What text? Ethan answered before I could open my mouth. Stuff she wrote to a friend about how hard it is being here with us. Made it sound like we dragged her into all this, and she's the only one carrying any weight. My father took a slow sip of his coffee and set the mug down with a small, deliberate sound. She's got that job in the city she's always talking about. Steady hours, good title. But sometimes I wonder how much of it is really hers, and how much is just timing and other people doing the heavy lifting. All that big talk about success. Yet the second family needs a little help. She acts like it's too much pressure on her. The words were said almost lightly, like he was making conversation over breakfast. But they landed exactly where he wanted them to, right in front of Aunt Diane, who was family and who would remember them. I felt the heat rise in my face, but I kept my hands still on the edge of the table and my voice even. "I came because you asked me to come," I said. "I've been covering what I could without turning it into a scene because I knew things were tight." That text was me trying to figure out how to keep helping without disappearing into it. It wasn't meant for anyone else to see. My father finally looked at me across the table. His eyes were calm, almost patient. Helping looks different when you're telling people outside this family that we're the ones making your life difficult. Out here, people notice when someone shows up with city clothes and quiet deposits into the account and expects everyone to act grateful. We're the ones who kept things running for years while you were building whatever it is you call a career. Aunt Diane set her mug down. She didn't say anything, but I saw the way her gaze moved between the three of us, quiet and careful, like she was trying to decide which version of the story she was hearing was real. I didn't argue. I stood up, carried my plate to the sink, and started washing dishes, while the others finished eating. Behind me, I could hear my father and Ethan talking in low voices every so often, one of them giving a short laugh that didn't reach the rest of the room. My mother stayed quiet, her hands busy with a dish towel she didn't need. Later that afternoon, while everyone else was outside stacking wood for the fire pit, I went to the small desk in the corner of the living room. The old family laptop was still plugged in from earlier, the screen half asleep. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, I just needed to check a work email I had been ignoring. When I moved the mouse, an old thread opened in the inbox. It was between my father and my brother, dated 2 days before we had even left home. The subject line was short, "Handling Olivia at the lake." I should have closed it. Instead, I read the first message. My father had written, "She'll try to act like she's the one keeping things afloat once we're there. Make sure people know her success is mostly luck, and that she's been difficult about stepping up. We need everyone seeing the same picture before the gathering." Ethan's reply sat right below it. "Already started telling a couple people back home that she's part of why things got messy with the supplier. She won't push back if she thinks it'll make her look bad in front of Aunt Diane and the neighbors." The last message from my father was even shorter good. "Keep it quiet until the bonfire. Let her think she's still in control." I stared at the screen until the words started to blur at the edges. This wasn't just anger over a private text. This was something they had been building before we packed the car. They had used the drive up here and the first few days at the cabin to start laying the groundwork piece by piece so that when people asked why we were really here, the story would already be shaped the way they wanted it. My hands were shaking when I closed the laptop and left it exactly as I had found it. I didn't delete the thread, I didn't take a screenshot. I just stood there for a long minute, breathing through the tight place in my throat, and then I walked outside onto the porch. Aunt Diane was sitting in one of the old wooden chairs looking out toward the water. She turned when she heard the door. "You all right, honey?" She asked, her voice soft the way it always got when she sensed something was off. I almost told her. The words were right there, the email thread still glowing behind my eyes. But if I showed her now, it would look exactly like what they wanted it to look like, me causing more trouble right before everyone gathered tomorrow. I swallowed it back. "I'm fine," I said. "Just needed some air." She nodded, but she didn't look away from me right away. I could feel her watching as I walked down the path toward the edge of the trees. That evening, after dinner, my phone buzzed in my pocket while I was standing on the porch. It was a notification from the family group chat. Ethan had forwarded a long string of messages, but the name at the top showed it had gone to me instead of to my father. He had hit the wrong contact. I opened it. The thread was from that afternoon between the two of them again. Ethan had written, "Make sure to mention how she only shows up when it looks good for her. Downplay the job thing, say it's not as stable as she claims. People will believe it coming from you at the gathering." My father's reply was short, already planned. "She won't know what hit her until it's too late." I read the whole exchange twice, standing there in the dark with the phone screen lighting up my hands. Every line was another brick in the wall they were building around me. Not because of anything I had done wrong, but because it served whatever story they needed to tell to keep control of how people saw our family. I sat on the edge of the bed in the small room I shared with my mother, the phone still glowing in my lap, long after the screen should have gone dark. The cabin was quiet, except for the occasional creak of old wood and the low sound of the lake against the shore. Somewhere in the main room I could hear my father's voice, calm and steady, talking to Ethan about tomorrow night, like it was just another evening. They weren't just upset about the text, they had been working on this for days, maybe longer. And tomorrow at the neighborhood bonfire down the road, they were going to make sure everyone else believed the version they had written. I set the phone face down on the quilt and stared at the ceiling until the patterns in the old wood started to blur. The hurt was still there, sharp and quiet, but something else was moving underneath it now. Something that felt like the first cold edge of clarity. They had planned for me to stay small and silent. I was starting to wonder what would happen if I didn't. The morning of the gathering came in slow and grey, the kind of light that made the old cabin windows look even thinner than they were. I woke up before anyone else and sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, listening to the quiet. My phone was still face down on the quilt where I had left it the night before. I didn't need to read the forwarded thread again. The words were already inside me, steady and clear. I got dressed, made coffee in the small kitchen, and waited. Aunt Diane came in, first gave me a quiet nod, and started setting out the plates we would bring to the Harlan's bonfire that evening. She didn't ask about last night. She just worked beside me like she understood that some things needed space before they could be said out loud. My father and Ethan appeared later, moving around each other with the easy rhythm of people who already knew the plan. My mother stayed near the sink, her hands busy, her eyes careful. No one mentioned the text or the emails or the way the air in the cabin had changed. We just moved through the day like we were still the same family that had driven up here 5 days earlier. By late afternoon, we were walking the path through the trees toward the big cabin down the road. The Harlans had already lit the fire pit and set out tables with food people had brought from their own places. Neighbours I barely knew smiled and waved. Tyler Reed, my cousin from my mother's side who had a cabin 2 bends down the lake, was already there with his wife helping set up chairs. He grinned when he saw me and pulled me into a quick hug. "Been a while," he said. "Heard things got complicated back home. Glad you all made it up here." I smiled back, the expression feeling thin on my face. Complicated is one word for it. The fire crackled, and people gathered in loose circles, plates balanced on knees, voices low against the sound of the lake. My father found a spot near the center where his voice would carry. Ethan stayed close to him the way he always did when there was something to prove. I stayed on the edge of the group with Aunt Diane and Tyler listening. It started small the way it had at breakfast. My father accepted a cup of coffee from Mrs. Harlan and shook his head like he was carrying something heavy. "Appreciate you all letting us borrow this place for a bit. Things back home got messy with the business, and sometimes you just need to get away from the noise. Olivia's been helping where she can, but you know how it is with these young folks and their careers. Hard to know how much is real success and how much is just the right timing and other people picking up the slack." A few people nodded politely. Tyler glanced at me, eyebrows slightly raised. I kept my face still. Ethan picked up the thread a minute later, his voice easy, almost friendly. "She's got that title at her company, but half the time, it sounds like she's the one being carried. Family's been through a lot lately, and she's been figuring out her own stuff. Can't blame her for that, I guess." The words were soft, wrapped in the kind of casual concern that made it hard to call them cruel. But they were landing exactly where my father and brother wanted them to. People were starting to look at me differently, the way you look at someone who might not be as steady as they seemed. I felt the old hurt rise, the one that had lived in me since I was a kid, and started doing well while Ethan struggled. But something else was there now too, sharper and colder. I had the emails, I had the forwarded thread. I had spent 5 days watching them build this story around me like it was the only one that mattered. When the conversation dipped, I stood up. The movement was small, but the firelight caught on my face and a few heads turned. I walked over to where my father and Ethan were sitting and stopped just outside their circle. I saw the email thread. I said my voice quiet enough that only the people closest could hear clearly. The one between the two of you from before we left home. The one with the subject line about handling me at the lake. I also got the forwarded messages last night when Ethan hit the wrong name. I know what you plan to say here tonight. The air around the fire seemed to tighten. My father's hand stilled on his cup. Ethan's mouth opened, then closed again. Aunt Diane had gone very still beside me. Tyler Reed was watching my father now instead of the flames. My father recovered first the same calm edge in his voice he had used in the kitchen. "That's private family business, Olivia. You shouldn't have been reading things that weren't meant for you." "I didn't go looking," I answered. "It was open on the laptop, and the forward came straight to my phone. But even if I hadn't seen any of it, I would still be standing here right now because I'm done letting you rewrite who I am in front of people who are supposed to be family." Ethan tried to laugh short and sharp. "You're making this into something bigger than it is. We were just trying to keep things from getting worse back home. You've always been sensitive about your job." I looked at him then, at my father. The pain was still there, but it didn't shake my voice. "My job is steady because I worked for it. I came here because you asked. I covered bills without making it a scene because that's what I thought family did. And the whole time you were building a story that made me the difficult one so no one would ask too many questions about what was really happening with the business. I heard every comment you made at breakfast yesterday. I heard the ones you're making now. I'm not going to sit here and let you keep doing it." Mrs. Harlan shifted in her chair. Someone near the edge of the circle stood up and carried their plate back to the table, the movement loud in the sudden quiet. My father's face had gone tight at the corners of his mouth, the way it did when he was losing control of a room. He opened his mouth to say something else, but Aunt Diane spoke first, her voice gentle but steady. "Michael, I think she said what she needed to say. Maybe we all need to let it sit for a minute." Tyler Reed nodded once, not looking away from my father. "Yeah, sounds like there's been a lot of talking behind people's backs. Maybe it's time to stop." The fire popped and a log shifted. No one filled the silence with another story about me. My father set his cup down and stood up. He didn't look at me when he walked toward the path that led back to our cabin. Ethan followed a few seconds later, his shoulders stiff. I stayed where I was for a long time after they left. People went back to their conversations, quieter now, the easy rhythm broken. Aunt Diane squeezed my hand once before she went to help clear plates. Tyler gave me a small nod that said more than words. When the fire had burned low and most people had started heading home, I walked the path back alone. The cabin was dark except for one light in the kitchen. My mother was sitting at the table with a cup of tea she hadn't touched. She looked up when I came in. "I didn't know about the emails," she said quietly. "Not until tonight. I should have paid more attention." I sat across from her. The pain in my chest had settled into something quieter, something that felt like the end of a long-held breath. "It's not your fault, but I can't keep showing up and letting them turn me into the problem every time things get hard. I won't do it anymore." She nodded, her eyes tired but clear. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to drive back in the morning," I said. "I'll leave enough money for the rest of the propane and groceries. After that, I need some space. I don't know what that looks like yet, but I know it doesn't include coming back here and pretending everything is the same." My mother didn't argue. She just reached across the table and rested her hand on mine for a moment. "I understand." I packed my bag before the sun came up. The cabin was still and cold. I left a note on the counter with the cash and a short line that I would call when I got home. I didn't say when that would be. Before I got in the car, I walked down to the edge of the lake one last time. The water was flat and dark, the pines black against the pale sky. This place had held so many of the old stories, the ones I had carried with me since I was small, the ones that used to feel like they belonged to all of us. I stood there until my hands stopped shaking and the air felt clean in my lungs again. Then I got in the car and drove away. The road curved through the trees and the cabin disappeared behind me. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel broken. I felt the quiet weight of having chosen myself in a room where that choice cost something real. The family I had tried to hold together by staying small was already rewriting itself without me in it. The cabin would keep its memories, but they would belong to a different version of us now. I rolled the window down and let the cold Michigan air move through the car. For the first time in a long time, the tight place in my chest had room to breathe. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever had to watch people you love rewrite who you are to protect their own story, and you finally chose to stop playing along, comment healing below. What would you have done when you saw that forwarded thread?